Salud, amigos.
Hello, greetings everyone, and crew of our dear, contaminated, and only spaceship. The same one that, as of the last time we saw each other from these means, has made another lap around its imaginary axis and is still giving us news updates. And here in a counterplane with our map, we have a guest. And when we talk about a guest, we have been talking about an important guest. We have the honor of receiving in Dossier Ramon Grosfobil. Ramon Grosfobil was born in Puerto Rico. He's a sociologist and is a part of the Modernidad and Colonialidad group. He studied in the University of Puerto Rico, and he proposes a critical reflection about the theoretical device about the radical anti-essentialism and anti-identity device. He's also deepened the subjects of sovereignty, global logics, and colonialism in Puerto Rico, and about the decolonization of economics, looking at it from a geopolitical focus, and about the colonialization of power. This is very academic, but also very dry to those who have not entered those quicksand subjects. Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to have you here. I have very pleasant memories from Puerto Rico and of people who have fought for the independence of Puerto Rico. So, what brings you here? Tell us what the reason is for the ideas you want to share. Well, we are here as a part of the second school of decolonization that we do here in Venezuela. And the idea is to think of decolonialization beyond the colonial administrations, meaning we still live in a world that's strongly colonized in the measure that the hierarchy of domination, both economic as political, have been built throughout several centuries of colonization. They're still alive and still with us today. This is a great obstacle, not only in terms of the right-hand politics projects that are obviously imperialist, but as well as the same left we reproduce. They have a lot of colonialist ideas in their way of thinking. So a part of what the school is trying to do is to make a project from the left, but a project that is anti-patriarchal, anti-colonialist, and anti-imperialist, that can take account for the diversity of the world and not just the thought process of five men of five colonies or five thoughts of five men of Western countries. If you read the left of the West, the canon of thought is German, a French, and an American, as opposed to the critical thinking on the entire planet. And that critical thinking we have demeaned, and that's what we call epistemological racism. The work that we're doing here in Venezuela is precisely how to contribute to the Bolivarian revolutionary project here, and how in some way we may contribute to decolonialize our own conceptions of the world to make a contribution to the revolutionary process here. One of the inheritance that we have here is the modern state. The modern state is a heritage of that colonial history, and it's everywhere in Latin American. The modern state, liberal modern state that's also capitalist. And in Venezuela we have innovations in regards to construction and democracy and the communal power. And now there's a constitutional project that we're setting on the table, or that's setting the foundation of a project for a new future horizon that involves community. And community is in and of itself away from colonization. because it moves us away from colonization, the colonization that's been imposed in the world. See, verticality transforms in horizontality in a way. Yes, correct. It's about deciding for the people, and that's a capitalist structure by nature. In this way, this manner thinks for the people, and for the people that they never asked. And yes, this structure is very colonial and is imposed as authority, and you place 5 men of the West as knowledge, and they monopolize who says the truth, who says what reality is, and what is best for you. So it doesn't matter what you say, you are inferior, epistemologically speaking, in front of these 5 thinkers of the North. Regrettably, a lot of times us in the left, in a very natural and spontaneous way, without realizing, we reproduce that scheme. And that part of the process of revolution that we have is based on Enrique Dossier, has as a matrix the necessity of becoming decolonialized. And this was something that the critical thinkers of the Southern socialism said. When we read Che Guevara, when we read Mao, when we read Juan de Nkrumah, when we read the same when we read Hugo Chavez, the emphasis of a transformation is subjectivity. And the way we see the world in a cultural revolution that transforms our way of seeing things. Because if we only tend to the material needs that are fundamental, there's no doubt about that, but if we stay in that, there's no revolutionary transformation. In the way, if human beings don't change their values, their ideology, and their way of being in the world. So if we construct, for example, universities where now we have access, universal access, as we have in the Bolivarian Revolution, but the things that are being taught in those universities don't change, if we just imitate traditional Western university content, then we can't expect people who come out with a degree, well, they'll come out with a degree and they'll want more. And everything will be turned over, because now those people that are benefited from the revolution, they'll say, thank you, I've achieved this, but now I want this other thing as well. This is an insatiable need to consume. So in this way, the owner of the means that transmits the message is what's controlling this. Correct. So what we create is a paradoxical situation where the revolution creates something in the material plane of the people. They exit poverty from Venezuela. We're talking about millions of people that, according to the UN, 50% of people of the population are under the poverty line. Now, this has come down to beneath 18%. This is a huge accomplishment. But if we don't change subjectivity, if we don't change values, what we are doing is to produce, we call the Frankenstein metaphor. Dr. Frankenstein, who creates something that is extends, and they create this entity, and this entity rises, and instead of saying, thank you, you created me, he kills the doctor. So we use this as a metaphor to a revolutionary process without decolonialization, because what you have is you have all the material benefits, people become benefited from these, and since these people don't undergo a process of ideological transformation of their values, they become consumers and they don't adhere to the ideology. So they become benefited from this revolution, but then they turn against revolution because now they want more. They have the need to consume, or the need to obtain more goods, these values that life is about consuming, to have more, to have a car, to have more. So this becomes a contradiction in regards of the same revolution, because the same people that have become benefit of this revolution go against it. This is why we call to attention the need of decolonization as a fundamental part of the revolutionary process in Venezuela. We have to start by decolonizing our neurons, right? Because, or since this program, I was once told, you're going to be condemned to the high class. They see us the same in all the socioeconomic steps. And we were the first people to break those schemes. And we place reality on the map, because if we don't understand that we're making an integrated world, then this doesn't work. That a reality is a part of this conjunction. How do you define modernly this ideology for the layman, in layman's terms? This is the structure of knowledge. How do we produce knowledge? For whom is knowledge produced? Under what interest is knowledge produced? This is fundamental, because knowledge and power go hand in hand. So the structures of knowledge that we have inherited from the modern world, colonial and capitalist, these are structures of knowledge that are founded in the European canon of thought or American canon of thought. So under that canon, the critical thinkers of those places thought of their troubles and their realities, but they never thought of the troubles of our reality. And if we undergo a formation process, political or a ideological formation process or a theoretical one, and we import theories from the global north and not taking that critical thinking seriously, then we are looking at the world through the lens of the imperialists that oppress us. So we turn in some way into instruments of domination in the way in which we reproduce the theories and ambitions and perspectives that come from the global north, that they thought in their realities but not in ours. And here we have a diversity of critical thinking that, due to epistemic racism, being racism in the structures of knowledge, meaning the man of the West is supposedly better, then we ourselves have internalized this, and we repeat this even if we are leftists. We create a kind of colonialism from the left. So we don't take our own region's critical thinking seriously. That thinking that has thought of our problems, because the authors that have produced critical thinking in Latin America and Africa and Asia have thought of the problems or troubles of the global south. Now, in turn, the global north thought processes don't think of us, so we are applying theories that don't necessarily apply to our reality. There are useful things of the European thought, however, we can't just import their ideas to us and just simply reproduce this colonization. Instead, in the South here, we have critical thinking, and this is a very rich way of thought, and we may continue this as a project. This is what this project is about, to continue the critical thinking that's produced from our reality, and to take seriously the critical thinking that is being produced from other places of the global south that may apply to us. Regrettably, the structures of knowledge are mounted on, fundamentally, authors who are of men of the West, of the global north. Regrettably, here in the South, we just imitate them. We import those theories without realizing that in the process of importing this thought, we just reproduce all these structures that we are fighting against. If you create, as a metaphor, a university that gives opportunities to thousands of people who never dreamt of studying, and next to them you place an etymological university here in Venezuela, and you have thousands of people that enter this university that would have never had this opportunity, this is something to be recognized as something very positive. But what happens? If there's no change in the things that are being taught in the universities, if the same structures of knowledge are being taught of the westernized university that have been there all of our life, then the people that undergo that education and come out with a degree don't obtain a transformation of values, of theories, etc., to see the world. And well, let's not be surprised, and at the end, they end up going against the revolutionary process that they grab benefit from. That's what I call the Frankenstein metaphor. We could be producing a lot of Frankensteins because these are people that are being materially benefited from the process, but at the end they turn against you because there's no change in the subjectivity or values and vision of the world, because the contents that are there are a repetition of the contents of the westernized university, the Eurocentric university of all time. So the process has to come from a transformation of our structures of knowledge and everything that we do. As another example, communitary doctors. Here in Venezuela, I was in a graduation that was made exactly 1 year ago, and I was invited by President Maduro, and Enrique Dulce was also invited. We were present there amidst this graduation. President Maduro made a talk, a speech, about the benefits of this revolution and the quantity of communitary doctors that we produce. This comes at a great cost, and he was counting around 25,000, and they were going to the communities, and the objective was 50,000 or 60,000, and the process was undergoing this, so that every neighborhood in Venezuela had a medical staff. And I don't know anyone in Latin America who has made this effort. It's something that's very impressive. But at the same time, amidst this graduation, they had 5,000 graduates, and in the middle of this speech there was an interruption on behalf of the doctors that had just graduated. They were graduated on a Saturday, 8th of October, I remember, and on Monday they were going to their office with jobs. They weren't looking for jobs, they had guaranteed jobs. Amidst this speech of Maduro, there was an interruption, and Enrique Dulce and I looked and wondered what they were yelling. In this interruption, they were asking for one tablet. President Maduro was interrupted in his speech. He turned and he talked to a minister. Hey, let's see what we can do about this. 5,000 tablets. Well. He continued his speech, and in a moment there was another interruption 10 minutes later, interrupting the president. A car. They wanted a car. President Maduro, well, it was an uncomfortable situation because they were interrupting him on national television, and President Maduro turned around. Okay, let's see what you want to see, because of course a car is harder to obtain. A car for 5,000 people. It's not one ambulance what the people were yelling for. An ambulance. This has more sense. A car. This is something else. This is something different. This is I want more. People who've never in their life have dreamt to have a university degree, they're no longer wanting to be just doctors. They want a tablet, they want a car, not an ambulance, not a tablet for the office. No, a tablet for personal use, a car for personal use. After this, 10 minutes later, there was another interruption. A house. A house. Well, to me, this is a symptom. It's symptomatic because it means that these doctors underwent for 4, 5, 6 years of formation, and they exit with the same mentality they had going in, with the same values and objectives of a capitalist society. All these values that are destructive. We're no longer talking about consumerism, but destruction of life. We're talking about the subjectivity of I want more. It's no longer enough for me to have a degree that I've never dreamt I had, and that I'm a doctor, and that I have a job in 2 days. No, it's about me wanting more. And I'm bringing this to our attention because we need to decolonialize ourselves. and any country of Latin America to be graduated and to say, on Monday I have a job, this is a miracle. We're no longer talking about a country in Latin America that is graduating 30,000 people. And on top of this, you graduated without paying a single bolivar for the courses you took. The social cost is immense. And instead of saying, well, thank you, well, maybe let's have an ambulance, or what is my service to this community, you're still thinking about yourself. And in this way, if we don't have a cultural revolution or a process of decolonization, then we are making social investments. However, on the long term, you're not creating a revolution, because what you are producing is a counter-revolution, meaning people who become benefited of the process and end up as our Frankenstein metaphor. They rise up, they become alive through the revolutionary process, and then they turn and kill the revolution. Look, this is an experience of the Fourth Republic and the times in which I was there in the National, the School of Journalism. I was walking through the neighborhoods. I had a beard, as you did, and through these mountains where the police didn't enter. And I found an older lady by herself in a small ranch. It didn't have more than a 2x2. It was something unbelievable. She had a bed and something that looked like a table. If you saw this where the climate wasn't as beneficial, then it would have blown away with the climate. He said, "Ma'am, what are you doing here by yourself?" And he said, "Yeah, do you have any family? How many sons did you have?" I had 14 children. "And where are your 14 children?" "I don't know, some of them died, some of them didn't." "How many died, ma'am?" "About 7. And they said, "Well, how did you lose 7 children?" The answer that I have still here in my brain is, look, sometimes children die and we don't know why they die. Now I'm asking those graduates who are asking for a tablet and then a car and all these things, do they have the civic courage to go up to solve those problems in those places where not even the police go in? And this is something I lived, no one told me. I had the photographer that come with me, had a tie and a suit, and he had a very hard reaction, and he tore their tie, and they always changed when they went to those parts or their neighborhoods. So what does a young person that has obtained those privileges, what do those people do with this anecdote that I've just told? This is why the subject of decolonization, we usually see it in a folkloric way. The problem is here. Decolonization is here. We are still very colonial in this way of acting and way of seeing the world. So this is why the problem of decolonization is not a problem of indigenous people. It's not a problem of what happened in the 19th century. It is our problem of the entire country, of the entire world. The process of decolonization cannot be a process that happens in one indigenous community. This process is for all of us to undergo, all the Venezuelan populations and world populations, because the problem is, if there is no process of decolonization, of cultural revolution of our values, then we are going to repeat and produce a process that on one hand is admirable, the admirable way of generating material things for the people, but at the same time, the same people, if there's no transformation of their values, then you are creating a counter-revolution. Meaning these people will always ask for more and more, and if this process cannot satiate this insatiable needs, then the right comes in, promises things that they cannot fulfill, then all the people will turn against you. So the subject of decolonization is so important for the entire country because this has to go all the spaces of production, not just knowledge, but ministerial, popular spaces. We have to have this subject present. It's not something that we can talk about, the 12th of October, the day of invasion of America. We don't have to talk about decolonization there. It's not just for the indigenous people, it's for everyone. Because in some way, we have a chip in our heads that if we don't transform, then we have our days counted. We have our days numbered because in the way that you make a material revolution, subjectively you're creating counter-revolution, meaning this is a paradox. On one hand, you're creating structures of revolution. For example, Venezuela has a budget out of which 70% goes into social investment. This is something that doesn't exist in Latin America. This is why we defend the Bolivarian Revolution, and this is why we've publicly criticized pseudo-leftists that have documents that criticize Venezuela, repeating the right-hand politics. And we've publicly defended the Bolivarian Revolution because we have revolution here. The problem is, if we don't have a revolution that accompanies the material revolution with a revolution of thought, then the problem is you're creating a material revolution, and at the same time we create an intellectual counter-revolution. So in the emotional, in the spiritual, in the mental parts, if we don't transform this, then the same people that benefited from this will sooner or later go against revolution, because the thing is, the chip of values have not changed. The chip of desire of why we're here in this country, why are we living here? It's to consume more, it's to continue to truce the ecology of the planet. Or is it for something else? And that's when we have the subject of the horizon, where are we going? And we believe that that subject is now in the new constitution. The thing about the Constitutional Assembly. From one hand, we have tactical and immediate needs that are being met about the problems that are here in Venezuela, but we cannot forget the horizon, meaning we have a historical opportunity now that if we don't take advantage of, we'll lose. This historical opportunity is to set the horizon here. This was done by Hugo Chavez, the 20th of October in 2012, in the coup of Timon, where he said, commune or nothing, community or nothing. This is the horizon where we're going to, where the people can become empowered and little by little become more empowered, and substituting this modern state through our day-to-day decisions, not just about economics in the country. This is a process we are calling decolonization, because it's a decolonization of the liberal modern state that was inherited from the Fourth Republic from the 19th century. And how do we move this? We have to have a horizon. This doesn't mean, because I'm not an anarchist, we're not going to jump the modern state. This is outside of the scope of the planet we live in. You cannot jump the modern state, because if you do, imperialism will be here tomorrow. We're talking about a long-term transition, but we have to have a clear horizon, meaning we interrupt neoliberal politics, we distribute wealth, and we protect the country from imperialism for now. At the same time, you cannot continue reproducing these thoughts. You have to create powers, structured powers that will change the modern world. This is what happens in the coup of Hugo Chavez in 2012. He gives the Venezuelan people a new horizon towards which to walk. This is a historical opportunity. And community or nothing sounds a little bit like our French Revolution. However, this time that you're mentioning now, what possibility do you think it has? I believe that in all processes, there are historical moments in which windows are opened. These are windows of opportunity. What the Greeks called kairos. The Andean indigenous people call it pachakutik. Other people have ways of naming these moments. These moments are moments of opportunity, where a window is opened. This window has been opened on the 1st of May this year, when the President Maduro announced the Constitutional Assembly, that not only did it defeat the opposition's violence, because here we had an orchestrated process, orchestrated by the United States, that were killing people here, with more than 100 people killed and more than 100 injured here in Venezuela, because they had paramilitary snipers organized by the empire with the neoliberal right here. So what Maduro accomplishes is something that in Latin America hasn't been understood yet. What Maduro did with the Bolivarian government is something very admirable. It's to not answer violence with violence. And me, looking at it from afar, was very surprised, because it's not easy to not answer violence with violence when people are being killed. How did he answer? By making the democratic process deeper and calling for a constitutional assembly that will give a political response to this crisis that happened with this military violence. And the next day, the Guarimas disappeared. The 30th of July, after the voting for the Constitutional Assembly, the Guarima disappeared, because it was a political response to a process of violence, and the same opposition realized this, and they divided themselves, because they realized that with violence they're reaching nowhere. And this political process, we have to say, the President Maduro in Latin America gives this response that very little people are capable of giving. On the other hand, the president of the opposition is saying, who's killing people? It's Maduro, it's the Bolivarian government, and this is something that's incredible, because what the international press is saying is a bunch of lies, and it's sad to see the Latin American left eating that story up and criminalizing this government. So they wash their hands and they don't support the process. Not only do they believe it, they amplify it. Yeah. And these are people that are leftists. This is incredible. They believe these stories. Some of my own colleagues of the network of colonialism, they sign documents that are an embarrassment, because for any person that's in a process of decolonization, the first thing that we have to have clear is that they have to be anti-imperialism, and we don't have to be supporting imperialistic tendencies in a country like Venezuela. This has no excuse. They have signed these documents, a lot of intellectual people in Latin America, supporting the liberal opposition here. So this is unbelievable. These are thoughts of people of the left, and they are wondering what they have in their heads. These and historical people of television. He would come to television, and they said, this American Petroleum Corporation presents, and they extracted things, oil from Venezuelan soil, and they were also promoted by Venezuelan media, so there were no news against them, and this was the perfect Venezuela. Now, we had a separation, but there's no separation with pain. What happens is the left politics that we have to say, also needs a process of decolonization. But how is this possible that in Latin America we have a left that doesn't see the reality, and they swallow the international media stories against Venezuela, and they promote this poisonous message? Yes, it's something that's very incredible. I am very surprised. And this paradigm in which the left is operating, because this is symptomatic, the left is operating with a very westernized paradigm and is not realizing that we have to make a decolonization of our own paradigms. It's mental decolonization. And the world is connected via satellite, and the panorama is changing completely. Not necessarily, because if the categorical framework doesn't change, then you're just going to amplify this whole poison, because you're looking at the world with the same categories, with the same knowledge structures, and instead of seeing the reality, you are distorting reality with the categorical frameworks that we are managing. So this is why we are insisting that here in Venezuela, President Maduro on the 1st of May, that is not only an answer to the crisis that was happened here against the opposition. Not only are you giving an answer to that, but you're also thinking about giving an answer for the horizon, meaning to set that horizon of the 20th of October of the coup of Timon by Hugo Chavez, meaning community or nothing, meaning we have to set this goal of community without falling into anarchy, without jumping the state today. This is not possible. We have to set a horizon towards which to walk. The horizon serves as a compass. So in our daily lives, we are undergoing tasks with a notion of where we're going. So in this way, we combine in revolutionary politics the horizon with our daily lives, meaning the pragmatism of community, of what we're doing, of our strategy, always looking towards the horizon. Because if you stay only in pragmatism of what you have to do and what's immediate, and that temporality is swallowed by the horizon, and we lose our compass, we lose our north. And when we lose that, we start reproducing the system that we're fighting against. So we have to set our north so that what we're doing in our day-to-day has the horizon of where we're going to. So if you lose that compass, in the same way, if you stay just in the horizon and don't work in what's immediate, then you stay in a moral criticism, meaning something that's impeccable morally, but the world doesn't change because you wash your hands of politics. This happens a lot with the left as well. So you have to combine tactics, relations of power, with the horizon, and the Constitutional Assembly is an opportunity for that, an opportunity to place a very clear horizon that was given to us by Hugo Chavez on the 20th of October with the consignation of community or nothing. Something we don't see very often is that the armed forces of the Republic of Venezuela aren't a caste. They are the people in uniform, and this is very strange in the rest of Latin America. Of course, I've known, and I've been a military person in the south. Well, in Uruguay it wasn't this way, but imagine Chile and Argentina, to mention a couple of examples. They're not the only ones. The grandfather is military, the son is military, because this turns into a military caste, and this becomes a differentiation of class, of caste. This is a particularity of the process of revolution in Venezuela that fortunately don't exist in other places. And they told Chavez here, you're a leader, we're going to place some American bases here. And they said, no, you're wrong, we're not going to do that. So we have bases here in the north with the brothers of the Republic of Colombia. They literally pulled down their pants with 7 American bases, and they gave their sea territory and their aerial territory to America. And worse than Japan, whatever American soldiers do, that they do drugs and drink all the time, and they rape women, whatever they do, even if they rape the president's daughter, they have to turn them into their chain of command. What kind of republic is that? In Puerto Rico, we know that very well because in Puerto Rico, with the American military bases, we had to deal with those abuses by these soldiers on the street, and they were immune because they are protected by the army. I remember in Guapa TV I was talking about with a very charming personality and said, well, Walter, what happens is when they go over the line here, then someone appears. Because we have a great deal of experience of drunk American soldiers that are attacking citizens. We know that very well. And it's sad that we see a country like Colombia, as you said, approving laws that are a violation to the sovereignty of this country and a violation to the human rights of their own citizens. What do you feel about this premature and unexplainable death of Chavez? Well, I suspect that Hugo Chavez was poisoned. I have a very serious suspicion because a person with the health that Chavez had, and on top of that, he was going to medical checkups. Obviously, he had a coup organized attempt against him, and then all of a sudden he had cancer, a very aggressive type. So we know that this exists, and we know that this technology to induce cancer exists in the American CIA. And this happened with Pedro Albizu Campo, the leader of an independence in Puerto Rico. We're talking about the beginning of the 60s. I wonder how the technology is like now. Now you have a little grain in your food, and now they have a very impressive technology. When they incarcerate this person, they placed a radar through the wall producing radiation towards him, and the man rotted of radiation. He died and his skin was bursting, bleeding all over his body because they were producing radiation through a wall of his prison. This is something that's very old. So now when I talk about this, people react. It's like, oh, you're very paranoid. It's like, well, forgive me, you're underestimating geopolitics in this country because this is how the imperialism operates. And the intelligence agencies of these powers, these people are after the lives of leaders like Hugo Chavez. Well, I remember some mutations, genetic mutations that have appeared. Well, sometime I told this story and I remember it now. A professor of a professor of medicine of a university of the United States had the courage of sending me an email, and we know that all the intelligence agencies revise that. He said, "Dear Walter, I always watch you, and what Chavez has could have been produced by micro particles, radioactive particles of high density." Well, how do you put that in his body? Well, in some banquet, you bring him a marked plate, and that's how you can poison this person. And in a neighboring country, there was someone who was bringing food only to Chavez and not the same food as other people. And Chavez brought his person wondering, why is he only serving me and not anyone else? This left me very, very worried. But let's learn our lessons. On top of this, the type of cancer was rampant. These things are induced. We have the technology to do these types of things. So the whole situations were very suspicious to me. A doctor that has his very respectable, had the courage of letting me know that this could have been induced. And this is something that's always spinning in our heads, something we have to protect ourselves from what we eat, where we're walking, because these things can be induced in any way. Why did Fidel die in his vital normal cycle? Because Fidel didn't trust anyone, and he was always watched. Fidel suffered more than 600 attempts against him. He was always careful. And of course, we're not going to become naive and eat anything, nor smoking any cigar. Because they tried through cigars, they tried through food, they tried by ambush. The attempts were innumerable and very creative. They used a diving suit because he loved underwater fishing. They tried a scuba suit filled with acid. People are almost artists in this. If they were artists in creating life, it would be more interesting. However, they are artists of death, and this is the problem of imperialism. They are structures that create death. We are in a civilization of death. And in the times we live in, we don't have a way to go back. The independent person just gives us bad examples, and they make us profitable targets. Correct. Any time of sovereignty by the people is a threat to imperialism. And we have to say this because we're talking amongst Venezuelans. This is no longer about the coup of the military state, as we were talking about the 60s and 70s. The empire now is undergoing a process of decline. Now, the geomodality can no longer orchestrate the coups they made before. If they can't orchestrate a coup, well, then they'll destroy it instead. They prefer, if they cannot control these countries, they'll destroy them. So be careful, Venezuela, because the imperialist modality now is to destroy. We are now talking about the empire of the 50s or 60s. They had a power and a control over the world. They no longer have this power, so now they want to destroy countries. Syria, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen. We can see the list. And with Venezuela, since their coup didn't work, now they're looking to destroy Venezuela. They're very angry. Something like this has never failed for them before. And this didn't work. So, look, I got to know Libya. The standard of life was very enviable. And how they managed a country of tribes, you had to be a genius to manage this, and he was the leader. And each tribe sent an emissary. They said, we had this problem, and it was solved. I was there and in the ex-palace, and you saw the leader very, very pleasant, very tranquil, and under these circumstances they had delegates of any tribe would show up and they get solutions. I got to know the Iraq of Saddam Hussein and the Shiites of the south and the Sheikhs of the north, and this very troublesome warrior people. If you give them worms and pay them well, they follow your flag. They were great warriors of different orientations. And you saw that Iraq, 3 countries in one, and it worked like a Swiss watch. They all worked. And they all worked with Saddam Hussein. They had their own parliament. They could use their own means of communication, their own legislation. Who would want to destroy that country? Well, they destroyed it just as Libya. Everything that has oil with geopolitical interest has been destroyed. Now, here, it hasn't worked. But look at the example of Colombia next to us. This is what we have. This is correct. Any country that has resources, be it oil or minerals, the empire, if they can, because what they do in Libya is to continue to exploit their resources, you have a civil war that doesn't end. They destroy these countries. The same thing with Iraq. They have destroyed countries, and that's what they're looking for in Venezuela. They want to remain, they want to keep whatever has the petroleum, and then whatever else doesn't matter. They'll have a civil war that never ends. And on top of that, they sell weapons. It's very perverse. The decadent empire, let's be careful, it's no longer the empire of the 60s, that one that used to overthrow dictatorships. No, they destroy the countries. If I can't go up against them, then I destroy them. So be careful, Venezuela. Well, dear brother, I want to tell you something. What does Grossvogel mean? Grossvogel means big bird in German. We've flown high in this dialogue. Thank you. Thank you, Walter, for the invitation. Ramon Grossvogel, his discourse talks for himself. It was a pleasure to have you here, and wherever you are on that side of the receptor, thank you for listening to us. We will return, God willing, when our own contaminated spaceship has made another turn, and we'll tell you more updates in the next 24 hours. With the cameras, Mr. Director. Thank you.
The Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines